Jessica Monroe stared at the divorce papers she'd just signed, her hand trembling with vindictive satisfaction as her husband, the man she'd mocked for years as a glorified janitor, stood silently across the mahogany desk in their small apartment. What she didn't know was that beneath Daniel Monroe's worn custodial uniform beat the heart of the very billionaire who owned Apex Global Industries, the Fortune 500 company where she'd clawed her way to senior marketing director. The supreme irony, she was divorcing him to marry Trevor Walsh, Daniel's supposed best friend, and the company's charismatic VP of operations. A man who'd spent the last 18 months whispering poison in her ear about her loser husband, while Daniel quietly observed every betrayal from behind his carefully constructed disguise. In 72 hours, at the company's annual shareholders gala, Daniel would remove his mask in the most devastating public unveiling in corporate history, and what he had planned would shatter not just Jessica's world, but destroy the man she'd chosen over him in ways neither could have anticipated. But why had a billionaire spent 5 years pretending to be a janitor in his own company? What game was Daniel playing? And what secret did Trevor hide that would make his destruction even sweeter than Jessica's? Daniel Monroe pushed the industrial mop across the marble floors of Apex Global Industries' executive wing, his movements practiced and methodical. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he worked, invisible to the parade of suits that rushed past him at 6:47 a.m. To them, he was background noise, the custodian who emptied their trash and cleaned their toilets. To Jessica, the woman he'd married 6 years ago in a courthouse ceremony she'd later call the biggest mistake of my life, he was proof of her poor judgment and wasted youth. She'd said those exact words last Tuesday during her performance review with Trevor Walsh, Daniel's childhood friend turned Judas. Daniel had been cleaning the air vent above Trevor's office when Jessica's voice had carried through the grate with crystal clarity. "I should have listened to my mother," Jessica had laughed, that brittle sound Daniel had grown to recognize as her shield against vulnerability. "She told me marrying a man with no ambition would drain the life out of me. 5 years, Trevor. 5 years watching him come home in that pathetic uniform, smelling like industrial cleaner, talking about his honest work. Meanwhile, I'm pulling 60-hour weeks trying to build something meaningful." Trevor's response had been smooth as aged whiskey. "You deserve someone who matches your drive, Jess. Someone who sees your potential and wants to build an empire with you, not hold you back." The affair had been obvious to Daniel for 18 months. The lingering glances during company meetings Jessica didn't know he observed from security monitors. The Friday evenings when Jessica claimed mandatory overtime, but her office sat empty while Trevor's door remained locked. The weekend corporate retreats that hotel records showed them sharing adjoining rooms. Rooms Daniel owned in hotels Daniel's conglomerate had acquired 3 years prior. But Daniel's disguise as a janitor hadn't been about catching a cheating wife. The deception ran deeper, rooted in a past that only Trevor fully understood, or thought he did. 15 years earlier, Daniel and Trevor had stood in the wreckage of Daniel's father's funeral reception. Charles Monroe, founder of Apex Global Industries, had built an empire on handshake deals and genuine relationships, only to be betrayed by his board of directors in a hostile takeover attempt during his final months of cancer treatment. They smiled to his face and sharpened their knives behind his back, 17-year-old Daniel had told Trevor, his voice hollow with grief and rage. Every executive, every VP, every director, they all played the loyal servant while planning to carve up his life's work the moment he showed weakness. Trevor had gripped his shoulder, 15 years old and earnest. "When you take over, you'll clean house. You'll fire every single one of them." But Daniel had shaken his head slowly, a darker plan forming. "No, I'm going to do something better. I'm going to disappear. Let them think I'm too young, too traumatized, too broken to lead. I'll put proxies in charge while I watch from the shadows, and I'm going to see who they really are when they think no one important is watching." "That's crazy," Trevor had whispered, though his eyes had gleamed with something Daniel couldn't quite identify. "You'd give up everything?" "Not give up, transform. I want to see the company my father loved as it truly is, through the eyes of the people everyone ignores." Now 29 years old and with 5 years of janitorial work behind him, Daniel had compiled enough evidence of corruption, embezzlement, and human cruelty to destroy half the executive suite. But Jessica's betrayal, that had been the unexpected variable. He'd met her at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Apex headquarters, both of them in line during the morning rush. She'd been a junior marketing associate then, ambitious and sharp, complaining loudly on her phone about her dinosaur boss who can't tell Instagram from a telegram. Daniel had been charmed by her fire, her hunger for more. He'd asked her to dinner as himself, Daniel Monroe, though he'd introduced himself as working in facilities management at Apex, which was technically true. Their courtship had been swift, their marriage impulsive. He'd told himself he'd reveal the truth after their honeymoon, then after their first anniversary, then after she made senior director. But somewhere in the waiting, Daniel had watched her transform. The woman who'd once volunteered at homeless shelters began complaining about beggars cluttering the downtown streets. The woman who'd praised his honest work ethic started making cutting remarks about his lack of ambition. And when Trevor had joined Apex as VP of Operations, recruited personally by Daniel's proxy board, the poison had truly begun to seep in. "Danny, my man!" Daniel looked up from his mop to find Trevor Walsh striding down the corridor, all gleaming veneers and tailored Tom Ford. Even at 7 in the morning, Trevor looked like he'd stepped from a cologne advertisement. Daniel straightened, adopting the slightly stooped posture he'd perfected over 5 years. "Morning, Mr. Walsh," Daniel said, his voice carefully flattened of its natural authority. Trevor clapped him on the shoulder with the forced bonhomie of someone performing kindness. "How many times do I have to tell you? It's Trevor. We go way back, remember?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, listen, I heard about you and Jessica. I'm really sorry, man. These things happen." Daniel studied his oldest friend, searching for any crack in the performance. "You heard. She mentioned it yesterday. Said you guys had grown apart." Trevor's expression arranged itself into sympathy, but Daniel caught the microsecond of satisfaction that flashed beneath. "If you need anything, a reference for a new place, some help with the transition, just let me know, okay? That's what friends are for." Friends. The word tasted like acid on Daniel's tongue. Trevor had no idea that Daniel owned the building where Trevor lived, had access to every email Trevor had sent on company servers, knew about the offshore accounts Trevor had been skimming into for the past 14 months. Trevor Walsh, who'd cried at Daniel's father's funeral and sworn eternal loyalty, had been systematically stealing from the company while sleeping with Daniel's wife. "That's real kind of you, Trevor," Daniel said softly. "Real kind." "Don't mention it." Trevor checked his Patek Philippe, a watch he shouldn't have been able to afford on his VP salary. "I've got to run. Board meeting at 8. But hey, you're coming to the shareholders gala on Friday, right? Employee appreciation night, open to all staff. You should come. Free food, open bar. Might be good to get out, clear your head." Daniel nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I will." "Perfect." Trevor's smile widened. "I'll see you there, buddy." As Trevor's footsteps echoed away, Daniel returned to his mopping, his mind calculating the final pieces of his plan. The shareholders' gala, the perfect stage for the unveiling. That evening, Daniel sat in the studio apartment he'd rented under his janitor identity, surrounded by bankers' boxes filled with 5 years of meticulously documented evidence. His real home, a penthouse spanning the top 3 floors of the Monarch Building downtown, sat empty except for his security team and the proxies who'd manage Apex in his stead. His phone buzzed. Marcus DeLuca, his proxy CEO and the only person who knew Daniel's true identity, had sent a text. "Everything ready for Friday. The board has no idea. Jessica just submitted her proposal for the European expansion." Daniel opened his laptop and pulled up Jessica's proposal. Even now, despite everything, he had to admire her strategic mind. Her marketing plan for Apex's European expansion was brilliant, aggressive, innovative, and exactly what the company needed. In another life, they could have built something extraordinary together. His mind drifted to the memory of their first anniversary. He'd almost told her that night. They'd been in bed, her head on his chest, and she'd been talking about her dreams for the future. Someday, she'd whispered, I'm going to be CMO of a major company, and I'm going to completely revolutionize how corporations think about brand identity. I can see it so clearly, Danny, the whole path. What about us? He'd ask quietly. Where do I fit in that path? She'd been silent for a long moment. You fit wherever you want to be. I don't need you to be something you're not. I just need you to be happy. But her tone had carried an undercurrent he'd chosen to ignore then. The implication that his happiness somehow existed in opposition to her ambition. When had that changed? Daniel had watched the security footage dozens of times, trying to pinpoint the exact moment Jessica had shifted from loving him, despite his disguise, to resenting him for it. He'd found it 3 months after Trevor joined the company. The footage showed Jessica and Trevor at a company happy hour, both of them several drinks in. Trevor had been holding court about his previous position at Morrison & Lynch, dropping names and deal sizes with practiced casualness. Jessica had been watching him with something like hunger in her eyes. Not sexual, not yet, but the hunger of someone seeing a reflection of who they wished they could be. And Trevor, ever the opportunist, had noticed. Your husband's the janitor here, right? Trevor had asked, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes sharp. Jessica had flinched almost imperceptibly. Custodian, and yes, that's cool. Honest work. Trevor had paused for exactly the right amount of time before adding, must be tough sometimes, though. You're crushing it in marketing while he's, does he ever talk about wanting more? The poison seed had been planted in that moment. Over the following months, Trevor had watered it carefully, always with plausible deniability, always framed as concern for his old friend Danny. Now Daniel opened another file on his laptop, this one containing Trevor's real history. The history Trevor had hidden from everyone, including Daniel, until Daniel's investigation had uncovered it 6 months ago. Trevor Walsh wasn't his real name. He'd been born Trevor Holbrook, son of Richard Holbrook, Charles Monroe's former CFO, and the mastermind behind the attempted hostile takeover that had accelerated Charles's death. When that takeover had failed, Richard Holbrook had disappeared with $50 million in embezzled funds. He died 3 years later in a car accident in Monaco, but not before establishing trust funds for his son under a new identity. Trevor had befriended Daniel deliberately, at his father's instruction, a year before Charles's death. The entire friendship had been a long con, positioning himself to eventually infiltrate Apex when Daniel took over. But Daniel's disappearance had forced Trevor to play a longer game. He'd gotten business degrees, built a legitimate-looking career, and finally landed a VP position at Apex through a combination of forged credentials and his father's old connections. The embezzlement wasn't about money. Trevor had inherited millions. It was about revenge. About systematically destroying the company that had destroyed his father's reputation. And Jessica had been the perfect weapon. Daniel's wife, ambitious and increasingly resentful, ripe for manipulation. By seducing her, by poisoning her against Daniel, Trevor could hurt Daniel in the deepest possible way while also gaining a powerful ally in his corporate sabotage. What Trevor didn't know was that every fraudulent transaction, every manipulated contract, every stolen dollar had been monitored, documented, and preserved. Daniel hadn't just been watching as a janitor. He'd been watching as the true owner of Apex Global Industries, from servers Trevor didn't know existed, through security systems Trevor couldn't access. Daniel's phone rang. Jessica. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Danny, it's me. I know this is weird calling you after everything, but I need to pick up some stuff from the apartment tomorrow. I'll be there around 6 if that works. I don't want this to be ugly. We can be adults about this, right? A pause. I hope you're doing okay. I really do. This is the right thing for both of us. The right thing, Daniel almost laughed. Tomorrow at the apartment would be the last time he'd see Jessica before the gala. The last time he'd wear the mask of Danny Monroe, the janitor who'd never been enough for her. Tuesday evening, Daniel waited in their small apartment, soon to be just her apartment. He'd already moved everything that mattered to him out. What remained were props from a life he'd inhabited but never truly lived. Jessica arrived at 6:15, dressed in her corporate armor, navy Armani suit, her dark hair swept into a sleek bun, her makeup flawless. She looked uncomfortable the moment she stepped through the door, her eyes scanning the space like she was calculating escape routes. "Hey," she said, her voice professionally pleasant, the tone she'd use with a client she didn't particularly like, but needed to maintain relations with. "Hey." Daniel stood by the kitchen counter, hands in the pockets of his worn jeans. Jessica moved efficiently, gathering items from the bedroom and bathroom. Daniel watched her, memorizing this moment, the last time she'd see him as the man she'd deemed unworthy. "The place looks good," she said, making awkward small talk as she packed a box with books. "You've been keeping it clean." "It's what I do," Daniel said quietly. She winced at that, the barb hitting its target. "Danny, I didn't mean—" "It's fine, Jess. I know what you meant." He moved closer, leaning against the bedroom doorframe as she worked. "Can I ask you something?" She paused, a framed photo of their wedding day in her hands. They were both laughing in it, her in a simple white dress, him in his only suit. She'd looked so happy then. "Sure. When did I stop being enough?" Jessica set the photo down carefully, not meeting his eyes. "That's not fair." "I'm not trying to be fair. I'm trying to understand." She sighed, finally looking at him. In her eyes, Daniel saw guilt, defensiveness, and something he hadn't expected, genuine sadness. "You were always enough, Danny. That was never the problem. The problem was that you were only enough. You never wanted more. You never wanted to build something, to grow, to, I don't know, reach for something bigger. And Trevor does." Her jaw tightened. "Trevor understands ambition. He understands what it means to want something beyond a steady paycheck and a quiet life." "You love him?" "I love what we could build together." She picked up the box, holding it like a shield. "You're a good man, Danny. You really are. You're kind and loyal and steady. But I need more than steady. I need someone who wants to conquer the world with me, not just survive in it." Daniel nodded slowly, committing every word to memory. "I hope he gives you that. I really do." The lie tasted bitter, but it was necessary. Jessica needed to believe he was broken, defeated, accepting. She needed to walk into that gala on Friday with complete confidence, with no idea of the tsunami about to hit. "I hope you find someone who appreciates what you have to offer," Jessica said softly. "You deserve to be happy too." After she left, Daniel stood in the empty apartment for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and called Marcus DeLuca. "It's time," Daniel said. "Send the invitations. I want every board member, every executive, and every major shareholder at that gala. Tell them the mysterious owner of Apex is finally revealing himself." Marcus whistled low. "You're really doing this." 5 years, Marcus. 5 years of watching what people become when they think no one important is looking. Friday night, they learned that someone was always watching. "What about Jessica and Trevor?" Daniel's smile held no warmth. "They get front row seats to the show." Friday evening arrived draped in the golden light of early autumn. The Apex Global Industries Shareholders Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, a property Daniel's investment group had purchased 2 years earlier and renovated into the city's most prestigious event venue. Daniel arrived early, but not as the janitor. Tonight, he wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that fit like a second skin, his dark hair styled, his posture transformed from the stooped shuffle of a custodian to the commanding presence of a man born to power. His security team flanked him as he entered through the private entrance, moving through back corridors while the guests assembled in the ballroom. From the mezzanine level, hidden behind one-way glass, Daniel watched them arrive. The board members who'd tried to steal his father's company, many of them still in positions of power because Daniel had wanted to see how deep their corruption ran. The executives who'd sexually harassed secretaries, embezzled from departmental budgets, and falsified reports, all documented in Daniel's files. The managers who'd created toxic work environments, driving employees to breakdowns while meeting their quarterly targets. And then, at 7:47 p.m., Jessica and Trevor arrived together. Jessica wore a stunning emerald dress that Daniel had never seen before, probably purchased for this occasion. She looked radiant, confident, holding Trevor's arm as they moved through the crowd. Trevor worked the room like a politician, his smile brilliant, his handshakes firm. They looked like a power couple, like winners. Daniel's COO, Marcus DeLuca, materialized beside him. Everything's ready, Bray. The presentation is loaded, the documents are in folders at every seat, and legal has the law enforcement official standing by. Once you start, there's no going back. There hasn't been a going back since the day I put on that uniform, Daniel said quietly. Let's begin. At 8 p.m. exactly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The conversations faded to expectant silence as a spotlight illuminated the stage where a podium stood. Marcus walked out first, his presence commanding immediate attention. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this special shareholders gala. Tonight is a historic occasion for Apex Global Industries. As many of you know, our company has been operating under proxy management for 15 years, since the death of our founder, Charles Monroe. His son, Daniel Monroe, was deemed too young to take immediate control. Tonight, that changes. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel watched Jessica's face on the monitors showing live feeds of the ballroom. She looked confused, trying to process what was being said. Trevor's expression had frozen, his smile turning plastic. Marcus continued. Tonight, Daniel Monroe ends his observation period and takes his rightful place as chairman and CEO of Apex Global Industries. He's been among you all along, though not in the capacity you might expect. For the past 5 years, he's worked in this company as a custodian, watching, learning, and documenting. Everything. The murmur became a roar. Daniel saw executives turning to each other in panic, saw board members' faces draining of color. He saw Trevor grip Jessica's arm, saw her shake him off, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise, I present to you Daniel Monroe. Daniel walked onto the stage and the ballroom exploded into chaos. He stood at the podium, waiting for silence, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Jessica. She'd gone completely still, her face a mask of shock. Trevor was whispering urgently in her ear, but she didn't seem to hear him, her eyes locked on Daniel. Good evening, Daniel said, his voice amplified through the sound system, calm and controlled. I know this is a surprise. Let me explain. 15 years ago, I watched my father die while the people he trusted, many of you in this room, tried to steal his life's work. I was 17, grieving and angry. I could have fired you all, sued you all, destroyed you all immediately. But I wanted something more valuable than revenge. I wanted truth. He clicked a remote, and the screens around the ballroom lit up with images. Daniel in his custodian uniform, pushing his mop through Apex's corridors. For 5 years, I've been invisible. I've cleaned your offices and heard your conversations. I've accessed your computers and reviewed your files. I've watched who you become when you think no one important is paying attention, and what I've learned has been illuminating. Another click. Financial documents appeared on screen. Embezzlement, fraud, misappropriation of funds. These documents detail $47 million in theft from Apex Global Industries. The folders at your seats contain evidence of corporate malfeasance, from sexual harassment to securities fraud. Law enforcement is stationed at every exit. For those of you implicated, you have a choice. Resign immediately and face civil penalties, or fight the criminal charges that will be filed Monday morning. The ballroom had gone deathly quiet. Daniel let the silence stretch, let them marinate in their fear. Then he found Jessica again. But this evening isn't just about corporate corruption. It's also about personal betrayal. He clicked the remote once more. The screens filled with security footage. Jessica and Trevor in Trevor's office. Their affair laid bare in silent video. Jessica's gasp was audible even from the stage, her hand flying to her mouth. Trevor had gone pale, his eyes darting toward the exits. Trevor Walsh, Daniel said, his voice harder now, whose real name is Trevor Holbrook. Son of Richard Holbrook, the man who attempted to destroy my father's company and embezzled $50 million before fleeing the country. You've been stealing from Apex systematically, haven't you, Trevor? Following in your father's footsteps. But you wanted to hurt me personally too? That's why you seduced my wife. Trevor bolted. He made it 3 steps before security grabbed him, pulling him back into the ballroom. The room erupted again, voices shouting questions, people trying to leave, security blocking the doors. Daniel raised his hand, and somehow, impossibly, silence fell again. "Jessica Monroe," he said, softer now. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her carefully applied makeup running. "You divorced me 3 days ago because you thought I was nobody. You left me for a man you believed was somebody. You wanted ambition. You wanted empire. You wanted someone who would reach for more." He paused. "You were married to that person the entire time. You just couldn't see past the uniform." He clicked the remote one final time. The screen showed Jessica's own proposal for European expansion, the one she'd submitted to the board. "Your proposal is brilliant. Under different circumstances, I would have greenlit it immediately. You have everything I ever admired in a partner: intelligence, drive, strategic vision, everything except the ability to see value in people who don't perform their worth for you." Jessica was sobbing openly now, her hands covering her face. The room watched in horrified fascination as Daniel delivered his final blow. "Your proposal is rejected. Your position as senior marketing director is terminated, effective immediately. Not because you had an affair, I don't care about that anymore, but because you can't be trusted to evaluate people's worth, which makes you a liability in any leadership position. You'll receive the severance package outlined in your contract, and I'll provide a neutral reference if requested, but you're done at Apex." He turned his attention back to Trevor, who'd stopped struggling in security's grip. "Trevor Holbrook, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and corporate espionage. The evidence against you is overwhelming and has been turned over to federal prosecutors. Your father died thinking he'd beaten Charles Monroe. You'll spend the next decade in prison knowing you failed to finish what he started." Trevor's face had transformed into something ugly, all pretense stripped away. "You're a psychopath," he spat. "Who does this? Who plays dress-up for 5 years just to humiliate people?" Daniel stepped down from the stage, walking through the crowd that parted before him like water. He stopped directly in front of Trevor, looking him in the eyes. "Someone who learned that the truth only emerges when people think no one's watching," Daniel said quietly. "You were my best friend, Trevor. I trusted you with everything. You know what hurts most? It's not that you betrayed me. It's that you were never really my friend at all. Every moment, every memory, it was all your father's plan. You played a role for 15 years. At least I only played mine for 5. He turned to Jessica, who'd sunk into a chair, broken and trembling. "And you, I loved you. The real you, not the corporate climber you became. I kept hoping that woman would come back. But she didn't. Instead, you became exactly like everyone else in this room, willing to step on anyone you perceived as beneath you to get what you wanted." "Danny," she whispered, her voice destroyed. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know," Daniel corrected. "That's different. You had a husband who came home every night, who never complained, who supported your career even when you mocked his. You had loyalty, Jessica. You just couldn't see it because it didn't come wrapped in a 6-figure salary in a corner office." He stepped back, addressing the room at large. "I'm cleaning house. Over the next month, 70% of Apex's executive leadership will be replaced. If you're not sure whether that includes you, check the folder at your seat. If there's a pink slip inside, security will escort you out tonight. If there's a green letter, congratulations. You're one of the few people who treated everyone in this company with basic dignity, regardless of their position. You'll be rewarded accordingly." The scramble for folders was immediate and desperate. Daniel watched the chaos unfold, feeling strangely empty. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, the culmination of 5 years of sacrifice and planning. Instead, he just felt tired. He looked at Jessica one more time. She'd opened her folder with shaking hands. Pink slip. She looked up at him with devastated eyes, and for a moment, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with in that coffee shop, vulnerable and afraid. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. Daniel nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, if not forgiveness. Then he turned and walked away, Marcus falling into step beside him. "Jesus Christ," Marcus breathed as they exited the ballroom. "That was the most brutal thing I've ever witnessed." "It was necessary," Daniel said flatly. Was it, though? You destroyed them both completely. Trevor's going to prison, and Jessica, she'll never recover from this professionally. You could have just fired them quietly, divorced her without the public humiliation. Daniel stopped walking, turning to face his COO. My father built this company on the belief that people deserved dignity, regardless of their position. He died watching people he'd trusted spit on that belief. I needed to know if Apex could be saved, if there were still good people here, or if the rot had spread too deep. 5 years as a janitor taught me that most people will show you exactly who they are if they think you can't hurt them. The executives who spoke to me with respect, the managers who learned my name, the directors who said thank you, those people get to stay. Everyone else? He gestured back toward the ballroom. They get exactly what they earned. And Jessica, she didn't embezzle or harass anyone. She just fell for the wrong guy. She divorced me because she thought I was worthless, Daniel said, his voice cold. She looked at 5 years of marriage and decided I wasn't worth the effort because I didn't have the right job title. That's who she chose to be, Marcus. I'm just showing her the consequences of that choice. 3 months later, Daniel stood in his penthouse office overlooking the city as winter settled in. Apex Global Industries had survived the purge. Stock prices had dipped initially, but recovered once investors realized the company was finally being run with integrity. The new executive team was younger, hungrier, and actually competent. Several of Daniel's former fellow custodians had been promoted to management positions after Daniel discovered they had degrees and experience they'd been unable to leverage past discriminatory hiring practices. Trevor's trial was set to begin in February. Federal prosecutors were calling it one of the most elaborate corporate espionage cases in decades. He'd be convicted, Marcus had assured Daniel. The evidence was ironclad. Jessica had left the city entirely. Through his network, Daniel had heard she'd moved to Portland and taken a job at a mid-sized marketing firm, several levels below her previous position. She'd sold the emerald dress on a resale site. Her social media accounts had gone dark. Daniel's phone buzzed. Elena Rodriguez, his new CMO, a brilliant strategist who'd been working as a department coordinator because her previous boss had felt threatened by her talent, had sent an email. The European expansion proposal is ready for your review. I incorporated some of Jessica's ideas. They really were excellent, and built on them. I think you'll be impressed. Daniel opened the attachment, scanning the proposal. Elena had taken Jessica's foundation and elevated it, adding layers of cultural sensitivity and market research that made the strategy even stronger. It was exactly what Jessica could have done if she'd stayed, if she'd been willing to see Daniel as a partner rather than an obstacle. He approved the proposal and sat back, staring at the city lights. The view from the penthouse was stunning, but some nights Daniel found himself missing the simplicity of his custodian apartment, the routine of his double life. There had been a strange freedom in being invisible, in moving through the world without the weight of everyone's expectations and judgments. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Monroe, there's a Jessica Monroe here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Daniel's hand froze on the phone. Send her up. He stood by the window, waiting, his heart beating faster than he'd like to admit. When the elevator doors opened and Jessica stepped out, he barely recognized her. She'd cut her hair short, wore jeans and a simple sweater, and looked younger somehow, stripped of her corporate armor. Hi, she said quietly, staying near the elevator as if ready to flee. Hi. They stared at each other across the vast office. Finally, Jessica moved closer, her eyes taking in the space, the original artwork, the custom furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views. This is what I wanted for us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This life, this success. I wanted it so badly, Danny, and I had it the whole time. You had me, Daniel corrected. Not this, never this. I would have given up all of it. The money, the company, everything. If you just loved me for who I was, not who you needed me to be. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I know that now. Too late, but I know it. She moved to the window, standing beside him but not touching. I've spent 3 months in therapy, trying to figure out how I became the person who could throw away 5 years of marriage because my husband's job embarrassed me. Do you want to know what I learned? Tell me. I was terrified, not of being poor, we weren't poor, but of being ordinary. My mother grew up in poverty, worked her way into the middle class through sheer force of will, and raised me with this constant message that ordinary was death. That if I wasn't constantly climbing, constantly achieving, I was failing. She never said, "I love you." She said, "I'm proud of you" when I got promotions, but nothing when I was just me. Jessica laughed bitterly. So I married a kind man who loved me unconditionally, and I tortured him for 5 years because he wasn't helping me run from the terror of being ordinary. Daniel absorbed this, feeling some of his anger soften, despite himself. I'm not going to absolve you, Jessica. What you did, what you said about me, how you made me feel, that doesn't disappear because you've gained insight into your psychology. I know, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. She turned to face him fully. I just needed you to know that I see it now. The life we could have built if I'd been brave enough to just be happy with what we had. And I needed to tell you that what you did at that gala, it destroyed me, but it also saved me. I was becoming something monstrous, Danny. Someone who measured people's worth in dollar signs and job titles. You held up a mirror, and I finally saw what I'd become. And Trevor? Daniel asked. Jessica's expression hardened. He played me perfectly. Every insecurity, every doubt, he knew exactly what to say to make me feel justified in my resentment. I was complicit, absolutely, but he orchestrated it. That's what makes it so much worse. I wasn't just a bad wife. I was a mark. They stood in silence, the city glittering below them. Finally, Jessica said, I'm moving to Portland permanently. I have a good job, nothing glamorous, but honest work with people who actually care about doing good marketing, not just chasing prestige. I'm dating someone, a teacher actually. He thinks I'm amazing even though I'm just a marketing manager at a sustainable products company. It's taken me 3 months to believe he's not lying. I hope it works out, Daniel said, and found he meant it. Me too. Jessica moved toward the elevator, then paused. For what it's worth, the woman you married in that courthouse, she was real. She got lost, but she was real. I'm trying to find her again. Good luck, Jessica. You too, Danny. I hope you find someone who sees you. All of you. Not the janitor, not the billionaire. Just you. The elevator doors closed, and Jessica disappeared from his life for the second time. Daniel stood alone in his penthouse office, surrounded by everything he'd built, everything he'd protected, everything he'd sacrificed for. And he realized with startling clarity that he had no idea who Daniel Monroe was when he wasn't playing a role. For 5 years, he'd been the janitor. Before that, he'd been the traumatized son. Now he was the triumphant CEO. But stripped of all those identities, who was he? His phone buzzed. Elena Rodriguez had sent another message. P.S. I noticed you approved the janitor to manager pipeline program I proposed. Thank you for that. My dad was a custodian for 30 years, never got the chance to advance even though he was brilliant. This program would have changed his life. It's going to change a lot of lives. Daniel smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe Daniel Monroe was someone who understood that everyone, from the custodian to the CEO, deserved dignity, opportunity, and the chance to be seen. He'd spent 5 years invisible, documenting injustice and betrayal. Perhaps it was time to spend the next 5 years visible, building something better. Outside his window, the city sparkled with a million stories. People working late, people heading home, people dreaming of better days. Daniel had exposed corruption, destroyed betrayers, and reclaimed his company. Now came the harder part, building something worth having in the first place. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. That expansion Elena proposed? Approve it. And I want to create a foundation in my father's name, focused on educational opportunities for people in service positions. If someone's working as a custodian, but has a business degree, we help them transition. If they're interested in getting a degree, we pay for it. That's going to cost million, Marcus said. I have millions. Let's use them for something that matters. After he hung up, Daniel looked at his reflection in the darkened window, a man in an expensive suit standing in a penthouse office, finally visible after years of hiding. But he still wore a disguise, he realized, just a different one. The real Daniel Monroe was still somewhere underneath, waiting to emerge. And maybe with time, he'd figure out who that person was meant to be. For now, though, he had a company to rebuild, lives to change, and a father's legacy to honor. The rest would come, or it wouldn't. Either way, he was done hiding.